Hi, I'm Joe Sorge, and I have a question for you. Would you sell your children for money? Crazy question, right? But what if I told you there's a country where people make money, a lot of money, taking a child away from a parent, and the government allows it? In fact, in that country, government officials can take money from the traffickers who deal in this business. You'd probably say that's horrific. We got to put a stop to that. What country is that in? Let's write to the UN. Well, I'm standing in that country right now, and I didn't have very far to travel. Think I'm crazy or exaggerating? Well, let's look at some of the facts that I've dug up, and then we can reevaluate. There's 17 million children in the United States whose parents live apart because of divorce or separation or because they were never married. We have the highest percentage of children living in single-parent households in the developed world, nearly 3 out of 10 households. And the trend has been increasing for the last 50 years. You might ask, how did it get this way? What is it about the United States that causes it to lead the developed world in single-parent households? Let's take a look at some history. 50 years ago, women rarely worked outside the home, and their primary role was to raise children. If a couple divorced, it was just assumed that the man would find a new wife, the woman would find a new husband, the new husband would adopt the children, and then both families would begin to have more children. Any obligation to pay alimony or child support would typically end upon the first wife's remarriage, and so these payments would usually be temporary. But things have changed. People today are far less likely to remarry and adopt a set of children, and this has led to an explosion in the number of single-parent households and a prolonging of the payment obligations. Other social trends are changing too. Women now make up half our workforce, and over 70% of married households have 2 wage earners. Mom is no longer making apple pie and waiting for the children to get home from school. She's out at work, just like Dad. Men now help more around the house and with the children, and this has strengthened the bonds between modern fathers and their children. So have the U.S. divorce laws been modified to adapt to these rapidly changing social trends? The answer, unfortunately, is no. Our laws still assume that one parent will stay at home and watch the kids, and the other parent will be off at work earning money. In fact, an entire divorce industry has evolved to help people fight over who gets control of the kids, because getting control of the kids means you're entitled to collect money called child support from the breadwinner, even if you earn just as much as the breadwinner and send the kids off to daycare. Our family courts spend countless resources choosing a primary parent, and our federal laws and regulations concerning child support and custody are riddled with the terms custodial parent, code for homemaker, and non-custodial parent, code for breadwinner. And to make matters worse, a huge government bureaucracy exists to promote these concepts of custodial and non-custodial parent, and to assure that tens of billions of dollars of child support are transferred from the person who has been labeled the breadwinner to the person who has been given control of the children. The result is that we have a $50 billion a year government industrial enterprise whose primary mission is to take children away from one parent and give them to the other parent. Because if they don't follow the federal rules about putting the children under the control of just one of the parents, the states lose billions of dollars coming from Washington, and the attorneys lose a lucrative business. And that's why we lead the world in single-parent households: money. Worse yet, the federal government has thrown gasoline on the fire by penalizing the states if they don't collect more and more money each year from the non-custodial parents. Federal dollars are tied to so-called child support enforcement performance measures, so the states have been acting like hungry wolves in search of prey. I know, I'm still sounding crazy, but let's roll back the clock a little bit and see if we can make some sense of this. Laws were passed in the 1970s and 1980s to deal with what, at the time, was called the deadbeat dad problem. In poor communities where families collected welfare, it was particularly difficult for single dads to earn enough to support 2 households after a breakup. If their wives had left them, these marginalized men would often vanish, leaving the taxpayer to support the family. Given the huge rise in no-fault divorces, this didn't sit well with the taxpayers, and they demanded a solution. So in 1975, the federal government created the Office of Child Support Enforcement and passed laws under Title IV-D of the Social Security Act. Under this program, the federal government would grant states $2 for every $1 the state spent to collect child support from dads whose families were receiving welfare. By 1979, the taxpayers were actually benefiting from this program. The feds in the state spent about $200 million a year to administer the program and collected $700 million from the dads. So the taxpayers recovered about $500 million. Not bad. A good deal for the taxpayers and for the families. In fact, the program became so popular that politicians jumped on the bandwagon and decided to expand its scope to the middle class. Admittedly, many non-welfare fathers were not paying all of their child support in the 1980s. 38% of the awarded money was not being collected, and it was just assumed that even middle-class dads were shirking their obligations. And so the federal government began to grant the states additional bonus payments for increasing child support collections, above and beyond the 2-for-1 matching funds. But here the federal government made a tactical error. Instead of incentivizing the states for every dollar of previously unpaid child support that they could collect, they incentivized the states for any dollar of child support they could collect, whether from paying parents or from deadbeats. The states quickly figured out that they could bring in more federal dollars by tapping into middle-class child support payments, especially those that were being paid regularly, even without the aid of government intervention. And so they went into the business of collecting middle-class child support with a vengeance. The state agencies hired tens of thousands of collectors. They went from spending about $200 million per year to about $6 billion per year. But shockingly, even though they spent huge amounts to collect child support from the middle class and started to lose billions of dollars of taxpayer money in the process, their efforts didn't make a real difference. 38% of child support still went unpaid. How could that be? Spending all that additional money? Yet the average proportion of unpaid child support remained the same, at 38%. If we look at the amount of child support actually collected in relation to award size, we see that compliance is greatest when awards are affordable. But as child support awards begin to exceed what a person is reasonably capable of paying, compliance goes way down. It's really pretty simple. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. So you'd think the states would have recognized this and put a cap on the size of child support orders to keep them in the affordable range. But instead, they decided the best way to handle this would be to throw the payers who had fallen behind in a debtor's prison. You heard me correctly. I'm not making this up. We still put tens of thousands of people in prison for falling behind on their child support payments, even people who earn less after taxes than the amount of their child support orders. And not only did we take away their ability to earn a living by locking them up, we also take away their driver's licenses and professional licenses and make it so that they can't see their children. Here's a piece of an interview that I did with Charles Lohr, an ex-deputy sheriff with a spotless track record. He lost his job because he was thrown into debtor's prison after he was ordered to pay more than he earned.
They order you to pay more money than you make. They say that if you can't pay it, they're going to throw you in jail. And then when they have you in jail, they take away your driver's license. So when you do get out of jail, you're breaking the law if you drive to go find work. At that point, I'd been in jail 10 months, 5 days, not charged with a crime, and not given a release date. The system, in my case, has set me up to fail. I look at it as they figuratively speaking, they cut off your legs and expect you to run a marathon.
Sound counterproductive? Sound destructive? Is there a better way? As many of you know, I've interviewed lawmakers from other countries to find out how they handle these issues. Here's a response from a senior member of the Danish Parliament when asked how they handle the situation when someone falls behind on child support payments.
If one of the parents doesn't fulfill the payments for the child support, then of course that can also be enforced by the authorities, and it can be taken directly from this person's salary, just as you take the taxes. We don't have a situation that is similar to the United States. We can't take people's driving license or professional licenses. We can't take people to jail. We don't have a debtor's prison in Denmark, so we can't use that kind of an instrument in order to enforce the payments.
In the meantime, back in the United States, research data shows that imprisonment of child support providers significantly reduces the amount of child support paid, as if that should not have been obvious to anyone with a pulse.
One of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. We all know a famous road that is paved with good intentions.
Child protection is one of the biggest businesses in the country. We spend over $12 billion a year on it. The epidemic of state child seizures is no mystery when you consider the financial incentives to do so. In 1974, Walter Mondale spearheaded the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. After the bill was passed, Mondale himself commented on how the bill would turn child protection into a child-snatching business. The bill provided huge incentives for states to grab as many kids as possible and put them in foster care.
Our theory is that the basis for this is the tie to the federal money. That every time a child is not placed in a home, the state of Kentucky, through its cabinet, is losing federal money.
It's an allegation we've seen many times in our 3-year-long investigation of Kentucky CPS, that instead of trying to bring families together, the cabinet forces adoptions to earn more federal bonus money. And it apparently started in 2004 when adoptions in Kentucky ballooned to 724, while the federal bonus money more than doubled, from $452,000 the year before to more than $1 million.
And across the country, states did just that. The number of kids in foster care began to climb dramatically across the country. Now you have to ask yourself, why would legislation be written in this manner? To create an obvious business incentive to grab as many kids as possible. Why would they write it that way? In 1997, President Clinton passed the Adoption and Safe Families Act, a heartwarming piece of legislation. For about a year prior to the passage of this 97 Bleeding Heart legislation, I remember being lambasted in the media with stories showing these poor children whose families didn't want them, who languished in foster care, whose hearts were broken, and how the state could help if only they had more money. It was an outright media blitz to create a myth that the reason that 500,000 kids were in foster care was because of bad parents, and that the state was these poor children's only salvation. But if only they had more money.
She says the concerted effort to take children away and put them up for adoption was so brazen, she actually saw someone successfully place an order for children.
So Clinton and his administration did what all politicians and government officials do. They make themselves look like the champion of children, when in reality, the very legislation they write provided more incentives to take kids, provided more money to the very people who are abducting children for profit.
There's a fundamental economic law which has never been contradicted to the best of my knowledge. And that is, if you pay more for something, there will tend to be more of that something available. If the amount you're willing to pay for anything goes up, somehow or other, somebody will supply more of that thing.